If you're wondering how much detail is too much detail, here's some food I made in this scene. Let's zoom out. I might have taken that too far. Hey, what's up? My name's Danny and I recently made this render. Some people wanted to know how I made it, and that's why I'm here. I'm going to explain it and break down everything. So let's start with inspiration. I very blatantly took this from MC Escher's Waterfall. I've always been a big optical illusion head, and the idea of what if more complicated and CG came to me pretty quickly. As you can see from this time-lapse footage, I pretty much started directly from the MC Escher structure and just iterated further and further. But the very first thing I did was I set up an orthographic camera in Blender because I knew this was how I was going to achieve the optical illusion. Basically, an orthographic camera is a virtual camera with a focal length of infinity. This means it has no vanishing point and no perspective lines. Everything it sees will appear parallel. And by this logic, the camera has no functional z-space. Everything will appear to be the same size, no matter how far away from the camera it is. And in other words, there's no real way to tell if a given object is 5 feet from the camera or 500 feet. Interesting fact, I just realized this after recording, but MC Escher's Waterfall does have vanishing points. It's not an orthographic camera like I assumed, no parallel lines. And I'd still stand by my choice to use an orthographic camera. I think if I had tried the MC Escher route, I would have given up immediately, but yeah, interesting. So because I'm using an orthographic camera, I can easily manipulate which layers are going to stack first and what's going to be occluded. So from a technical standpoint, the easiest way that I have found to work with a scene like this, and by the way, here's the scene, but what I do is I split my viewport in half, I put one of them into top-down mode like this, and then the other I go into camera mode, and I set the transform to view. So now, when I want to rearrange the layers, let's say that I want this bicycle lane up here to go, let's say, to the front, GZ, and then you can see I have a good view of how it's moving in 3D space on the left, or 2D, and on the right I can see how it's going to affect the render. Of course, I should mention this scene was a nightmare of a puzzle where if you move one thing, it'll break 10 others. Alright, let's talk about the cars and how I animated them. For my cars, I use Polygonix Traffic add-on. It's really great. You access it from a side panel like this, and you can spawn many different vehicles from a list. They even have aircraft now. They are really great models, but the only downside is that they are super high poly. I used these 9 vehicles, and they come out to approximately 2 million vertices, which is a lot. That really weighs down the scene. I was worried about instancing high poly models like this in geometry nodes, and there are really easy ways to set up a traffic simulation with geometry nodes. I'll link to a couple in the description. But the way I went about this was just through constraints and paths. So here's one of my cars. You can see it drives. It just uses a follow path constraint. So the first thing I did, using the existing geometry from the roads, I created every single possible path that the cars could take. Here's a crazily annotated image I made of all the different paths. I was able to figure out every single route, and of course these are curves. I used a Blender add-on called Measure It to get the most accurate lengths of these curves that I could. As you can see, I labeled them here. The reason I did this was because I needed the cars to have regulated speeds. One of these paths is only 116 meters, while one of them, as you can see, almost 3 times as long. So then I took those measurements, and as you can see in the text editor here, I wrote out some reference points to approximately how many frames I needed to space the keyframes apart to achieve a reasonable miles per hour. So for example, this road, A to E, 260 meters. So a car traveling from one end to the other, as you can see from my chart, needs to be 432 frames to reach around 32 miles per hour. So I took each of these cars, gave it the right constraint and keyframes that it needed, and after 2 or 3 days, this is what I had. Now, as you might have noticed, not all of these cars are actually touching roads. I knew there was some way that I could probably achieve this with the cars automatically transporting from like here to down here where it would realistically be. That seemed like a bigger challenge than the lighting problems that this would bring. So if you look closely, you can see that there are additional roads that I like to call shadow roads. They don't render concrete or anything else, they just give the car a shadow when they pass over. They have what appears to be the right shadow, but if I were to take off these shadow roads, now it looks like they're just floating, because in reality, they are. So let me explain the shader that this shadow road uses. It's very simple. I just have a diffuse shader and a transparent shader, and I'm mixing them with a ambient occlusion, color ramped, like this. So the result is ambient occlusion only at the spots I need it. So effectively it gives it a shadow just where the cars are passing. For the subway train, I actually did do the thing I was mentioning where I render the object in 2 different locations. As you can see from the top left, it appears that the train is seamless and just one object moving through space. But as you can see on the right, there are 2 different train tracks. So as it transitions through the tunnel, the second track that's closer to camera appears. All I had to do was keyframe the visibility in the outliner. Let's talk about the people. There are 2 kinds of people in this world. We have walkers and we have standers. Both of these groups of people have their own collection that they're sourced from. The way the walkers are set up is that they're all moving in place. And then I have a particle system over here that is set up with Boyd's physics. And it's extremely janky, but from a distance, it is just not distracting. I used many of the same characters for my standers. I also was able to add in many other people. A lot of these other people came from Ian Hubert. He has many characters like this that you can find on his Patreon, so I highly recommend that. I used a lot of those standers to help kind of create a boundary where I don't want the walkers to, go off the edge. So they're kind of restricted to the middle, and then I have a perimeter of the standers. And again, this is just a particle system using geometry nodes. And then for these people, these guys are all supposed to be watching this band that's performing on the roof. They have their own geometry network that rotates them towards the band. So I have this band focus empty right there, and they all look at it, which is nice.